Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm Daniel Torres. Hi, Christina Nicolau. How are you?
Hi, Daniel. I'm doing well, currently in the beautiful island of Naxos in Greece.
Exactly. Some publicity here for the Greek islands. Probably by the time this goes out, we'll be mostly back in the office. But as we're recording this, we're in a good mood because Christina's in a Greek island working. I'm working from the office, but soon to go on holiday. So one of the most dynamic areas in consumer goods in the last 2 years has been consumer healthcare, with a number of acquisitions and most notoriously spin-offs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the topics that we've been discussing a lot lately has been retail media and the overall evolution that we see with digital commerce. So I'm really interested to see what would be the consumer healthcare point of view in that field, right?
Exactly. Because while it is in the bigger consumer goods area, there's also some different regulatory aspects and some different trade aspects, especially because the pharmacy channel is very different in the UK or in the US as it is here in Spain, for example, where all the pharmacies are independently owned, right?
Absolutely.
So today we have two guests from one of the newest companies in this space, which is Haleon, which is a company that GSK spun off last year, and it includes a big number of brands in consumer healthcare like Advil, but also in vitamins or in oral care like Sensodyne. It's basically a conglomerate of brands that came most recently from GSK, but also includes legacy brands from old joint ventures with Novartis and Pfizer. So to talk about this, we have two people, as mentioned, and actually one in each side of the Atlantic. So Steve Kinsey will be joining us from the US, and Diane de la Baronniere will be joining us from Europe.
My name is Steve Kinsey. I am the head of development for Haleon's global digital commerce team.
And hi, everyone. So my name is Diane de la Baronniere, and I'm the Global E-commerce Media Director for Haleon.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us, both of you. It's great to have the digital team here with us. So big roles, both of them. Could you tell us a little bit more about what do you really do and how do those two roles really differentiate?
Yeah, sure. So as Global E-commerce Media Director, I'm really trying to help the markets land in e-commerce media strategies. So I'm trying to build tools and thinking and sort of frameworks for them to make sure they are building up their digital media plan and approaching the retail media opportunities and also all the challenges that come with it in the right way and in the most effective and efficient way. It's a new wave of media and advertising opportunities. So it's sort of like trying to do the thinking and helping them to do that, and also like taking all the learnings from the different markets and sharing it across like all the other different business units and markets.
So for me, the role that I work on and the team that I have the pleasure of working with primarily focused on providing a number of digital commerce capabilities and tools that support the markets primarily, but also some of our global teams. So in particular, I work with our content strategy, content management efforts. So that includes things like syndication, and the DAM, for example, our PIM and DAM interactions. I also have a team that works with some digital commerce analytics and providing analytics support, both for global reporting, but also providing kind of analytic frameworks to the markets and aggregating some numbers and analytics across the markets. I have another function and group that is responsible for our global Amazon relationship, so-called Global Vendor Manager, where we help think about how different markets can be launching with Amazon, some smaller nascent markets, what are the things they need to be aware of, et cetera. And then finally, my team also provides a number of capability building tools and programs, enabling some of the cross-sharing that can happen across the markets. Diane and I probably speak to each other on an almost daily basis, given the need for media and content and media and assortment, for that matter, to be so closely intertwined and supporting one another. But we do have different remits within the organization.
And it's interesting because you guys are both in global roles, but Diane is based in Europe and you, Steve, are based in the US. So how do you make that work out? And we can go a bit into the differences in the evolution of each in a minute, but how do you guys work it out?
Well, lots of use of email, lots of use of Teams, being aware of just time zones and the like. But I think the global nature of our team, we've actually got colleagues that we work with that are in Asia. We've got colleagues that are in Latin America. Our global team, frankly, sources in some cases from the local markets themselves. I actually think that's amazing to cross-pollinate some of the global strategies and some of the global conversations with colleagues that have practiced in the markets themselves. I myself have been with Haleon 14, almost 15 years now, most of which was in the US and the Canadian business. And so joined this team earlier this year and being able to apply that kind of thing. Diane, what would you say?
Well, I'm very glad you work very early in the morning because that makes our connection even better and easier. But yeah, I'm very aligned with what Steve said. I think it's a lot of like daily connections, either on Teams or email or quick chat. It's really important by the nature of our roles, content versus paid media, to make sure that we're really working as a team and not in silos, because basically one can't be really existing without the other anyway. It's making sure that we are aligned on priorities, strategy, and the most important project that we are working on. That's how we've sort of built the duo since Steve joined the team earlier this year. But that's the key of success.
Yeah.
I think what's also helpful is, whereas Diane obviously is extremely strong, very capable when it comes to media planning and strategy. I think she's quite competent when it comes to the other elements of the DCOM mix. Whereas I keep an eye on things like content and some of the analytics and some of the things like supply chain and the like, I've done media. And I think we make sure that we're always in sync kind of thing. And I trust Diane implicitly to be able to support and to speak to content strategies or assortment strategies. I would like to think she thinks the same kind of thing. I mean, you can't talk about one of these marketing or DCOM elements, if you will, without being sensitive to how the other things impact it. And fortunately, I think Diane and I both share kind of a broader awareness of the DCOM world and are able to apply those areas to the conversations, the meetings, and the strategies we have.
Yeah. Sorry, Christina.
No, I was just to say, I really valued Steve's markets experience and knowledge that I might be very, very much EMEA focus, where he has massive markets like the US and Canada experience, and obviously a much more also commercial approach. So it's a good complementary approach.
Sounds wonderful the way you two complement each other, as you put it. I want to ask Diane, you have a global role which is very specific to retail media. And it's kind of a new thing right now. Everybody speaks about retail media. We all see those charts being posted on LinkedIn with how much they're growing and how much investment goes behind it. So can you tell us a little bit from your view? In the past 3 years, how has this thing evolved? Where are we now?
Diane, you're muted.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. We do see a lot of retail media all over LinkedIn. I mean, at least on mine. It's a hot topic, and it's definitely something that it's not going to fade in the next few years. So, I've been working in shopper marketing in the past years and then evolving into retail media and e-commerce. And it's definitely a trend that we see growing, whether it's currently in Haleon or in my previous experience. literally since COVID, obviously, e-commerce have been booming up and the growth rate have been exponential. And I think the retailers really faced quite a lot of challenges from an operational margin perspective, because as much as e-commerce is driving growth, it's also like very costful for them to manage, like obviously the dark stores, the pick-in stores, the delivery, etc., maintaining like good websites, and they need to find other sources and revenues. And let's be honest, Jeff Bezos like mentioned it like I think like 8-10 years ago when he started doing Amazon advertising. So for them, it's a good opportunity to generate revenue with little. I wouldn't say little effort, but with like massive impact versus the cost behind it. If we were to consider the margin they're making out of media versus normal retail side, it's much bigger, obviously. And they also realized that they're sitting on quite a massive chunk of data when it comes to shopper. And it would be a shame not to monetize it, let's be honest, because as retailer, we're all after that. And then it's complementing their source of revenue. So yeah, it's I think it's a trend that it's here to stay, and we see a lot of consolidation already in terms of who are the major players in terms of retail media and how like everybody's trying to catch up on Amazon from a retailer perspective. So it's really interesting to be part of that evolution right now, and to be a player as well in it, because obviously we tend to influence and try to work in partnership with the different retailers to make it happen. So it's it's very interesting.
On your point of view, Diane, this means that retail media is more like supply driven than demand driven. So we had the capabilities already built in the retailers. They had the data, they had the need to monetize and help their P&Ls across. And this is how we came to the point we are today, right? And then demand starts picking up.
Yes. I mean, still we can discuss a bit more from his experience in the US and Canada about this, but the retailers Amazon have been definitely leading and driving this, the exponential growth and the opportunities, the sharing of data, the media capabilities. And I remember where from an EMEA perspective, we moved from a couple of banners on the website where now we are talking about integrated full funnel. And it's much more complex and broad than it used to be.
I think for me, so my DCOM journey started, 8 to 9 years ago. And I was actually an Amazon sales manager for the company at the time. I was the first dedicated sales manager for our Amazon business. But prior to that, I actually worked in classic brand marketing, brand management. And I think I've kind of always brought that marketer's mindset to the world of Amazon and to the world of retail media. Our retail media started with Amazon. Obviously, a significant portion of our media, retail media, is with Amazon. The ability to be highly targetable, the programmatic self-serve nature of most of Amazon's media offerings, I think is very enticing. The ability to kind of test and learn, to experiment with the different campaigns, the different targeting scenarios, the different bidding options, et cetera, just fascinate me. And you get results almost immediately, kind of thing. We've also been able to apply marketing mix modeling to our Amazon media. And what's fascinating, probably no surprise, is given the kind of the national kind of broad population scale that Amazon has, is you see far greater impact to your offline sales, right? The Walmarts and the Targets and the other retailers of the world with your Amazon media. And so you increasingly see Amazon media at the time, but increasingly even some other retail media partners to be brand media. This is a media that can build brand. The looming cookieless world that has been looming forever and is slowly upon surely creeping on us. GDPR, privacy compliances, so their ability to have first-party data, to leverage that so powerfully, I think has only furthered the value that retail media can bring. And what I've been fascinated by is the chance that when I have the chance to speak to retailers, to buyers, it changes the conversation that brand teams and that brands can have with retailers, which is great, right? It adds a new dimension, a new layer of conversation that we can have with buyers. Being able to talk to retail media selling teams as a brand buying their media versus the dynamic rate historically that would have been the buyers buying from us kind of thing. It adds an interesting layer. Profitability always is a little bit more complex, whether media is a trade spend or brand spend. But for me, it's all fascinating. And just the power of retail media for me is just only going to continue to grow and become more and more of a major player across the entire media mix for brands, above the line, below the line, and everywhere in between.
And I just wanted to add something on what Steve just mentioned. I think it's really interesting as well to see all the development that are happening in our APAC market, where retail media is actually taking a very different perspective and a very different form from what we are seeing in EMEA or Americas. I mean, when we look at social commerce or live streaming, it's a little bit, there is a side of things which are reminding us from the 90s where we were watching like live TV and our grandma were buying products, which is really re-happening again now. But the success of those streamers and those live shoppers and the social commerce side of things that they're bringing into our countries right now, in Europe and in the US as well, is very interesting, and dynamic is very is very important for us to follow, because this is definitely a trend that it's going to be really important for us in the next few years.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, do you consider that retail media as well, or is it a completely different animal?
That's a good question. I think it's retail media as long as it's linked to retail and sales. You can consider it as social commerce, where it's still very much driven by the social media aspect of things, and obviously there is a commerce aspect. I think I would consider it as retail media somehow, maybe an extension of retail media.
And you guys are in Haleon, which is obviously a big bulk of the portfolio is consumer healthcare. We also have another part of the portfolio which is more in the, let's call it, personal care space. But in the consumer healthcare area of your portfolio, are there any particularities of how you promote, how you work around retail media versus, call it, regular FMCG, or, for example, your toothpaste products?
You're right. I mean, we have an amazing blend of case studies within our own organization and portfolio. You know, personal care for us is in many cases our oral care franchise. We have a number of toothpaste brands around the world. We have vitamins and supplements, which tend to have a much higher e-commerce penetration and kind of adoption rate by consumers, and then some of the more episodic medicines and OTCs. So there's a number of things that have to require you to think about them differently, right? There are some regulatory requirements and limitations for some of our OTC products that limit our ability to sell online, not to mention the ability to advertise. It's a territory we're relatively familiar with. There's often been privacy limitations to sensitive categories, so to speak, with social media publishers and Google and the like. And so it just limits what you do, kind of thing. Sometimes the delivery methodologies or whether an item can be sold or shipped online change and vary. So we will often look to share the experiences across common product types and across common market or retailer types with each other, right? So they can learn from each other versus saying that a Sensodyne strategy is always going to apply for a Panadol or a Voltaren strategy, right? That's definitely not the case. There's also market-specific capabilities, you know, retailer dynamics and histories and laws and regulations, whatever they happen to be, often cause e-commerce today to have grown up differently. My experience of having worked in the US to then go to Canada was fascinating, right? It's relatively similar populations and demographics and people, but very, very different market dynamics in terms of the way that retailers interact with the brands, the development of e-commerce, et cetera. I think the diversity of brands that we have makes us only stronger, makes us only more capable of having different conversations, of being able to think differently about a pain product or a Theraflu product because of the experiences we've had with Centrum or another vitamin kind of thing. That richness of variety and the richness of laws across markets, I think, has also helped. Who knew that Canada may actually have a lot of experiences to share that would benefit Australia, or that, frankly, Taiwan would have a lot of experiences that could be shared with some of our LATAM markets and teams. You never quite think of it that way, but when those conversations take place, you really begin to find the opportunities to share across those teams.
And I find it fascinating what you're saying, Steve. So utilizing or leveraging, let's say, diversity as a benefit to the business through sharing the experiences between different teams across different regions and for people who are working with different products within the company. And I'm wondering, first of all, I do believe that there is a fair level of challenge still when it comes to building capabilities for digital within the more traditional part of the organization. So what are the communities that you would try to share these experiences with and try to build those capabilities first?
Yeah, I mean, we've established a number of so-called communities of practice, semi-formal ways of ensuring that collaboration takes place, and there's some peer-to-peer conversation and sharing kind of thing. I mean, the diversity that I, talk about the value of, trust me, it's also not easy. There's some challenges to it kind of thing. The challenges that Diane and I have of coming up with some recommendations and frameworks that are rich enough and meaningful enough to deliver competitive advantage, but can be applicable to all of those markets and brands and retail environments and selling types, if you will, is not easy kind of thing. And so there's often, you have to think of different strategies or frameworks for the same kind of business model or media approach, whatever it happens to be. But it certainly keeps my job fun and interesting as I get to learn every single day.
Yeah, I agree. I think nourishing ourselves from the different experience and the different market is very valuable. And as Steve mentioned, you don't know that something in Canada can actually help someone in Australia or the other way around. So it's very interesting. But it's also sharing learnings and best practices and case study. You want to have one size fits all, which is never the case, because obviously market like China is millions of miles away from a market like Brazil or a market like Australia or the US or I don't know, like Russia. And it's very valuable for us to be sharing, generating global approach, but it's also really important for us to make sure that we're leveraging the bottom-up approach and we are leveraging like the learnings and the experience at market levels to make sure that we can understand exactly what works and what doesn't work and how we can cross-pollinate the learnings across like all the other markets.
And I mean, we've kind of mentioned it before that retail media has gone through huge growth in the last 3 years, but we all know it's been like a growth of multiple speeds depending on the market. I guess that part of your guys' job is also to like be kind of evangelists of the value of retail media, across the company. How do you manage that? Like, how do you evangelize non-believers in other areas that are not in e-commerce to see the value of this?
I think sometimes the data speaks for itself. We always tend to push the market to use data and to build insights and to build their media plans from that. That's also what we're trying to do when we try to demonstrate the power of decom media and decom in general to other people which are more into like more classic channels, I would say. It's really important to ensure that everyone has the same skills when it comes to basic capabilities on decom and understanding what it comes around and like what is retail media and what we want to do with it. So when I built earlier this year the retail media strategy, I tried to keep it as simple as possible, because obviously we're talking to market, as you mentioned, which are very nascent and some other which are really, really advanced. And then it's just trying to make sure that everyone is speaking the same language, at least within our team. And also within the senior stakeholders. In the future, obviously, decom will be part as like a media channel and a sales channel and any other. So it's really important to make sure that we are embedding this in our way of working and in our thinking as any other channel, actually.
Some of the other things I've seen that has worked is the more you can start talking about retail media using the same words and terminology as so-called traditional media, if you want to call it that, in this case, digital being the traditional. So can we get to the point of starting to talk about reach and frequency? Can we start to talk about viewability in the retail media platforms, the ability to start thinking about it as programmatic biddable media, not necessarily a mandated trade spend? The more retail media becomes just another media offering and availability for all the different investment options, the more we can prove that it can not only drive new products, but also drive loyalty and also drive all the other things that we often look for other media vehicles to do, the more it simply becomes another media. I think to some extent, the fact that many of us started focusing on ROAS as being the metric that mattered with retail media did us a little bit of harm initially, right? Because the higher the ROAS, you would think that was amazing, but frankly, the higher ROAS is not always a good thing. And incrementality, frankly, may have been ignored when you were focusing on maximizing your ROAS. And that's kind of a so-called non-retail mindset that I think, people like Diane continue to evangelize with the markets and the brands that she works with and supports.
And I guess some of that also started because of how Amazon was set up, right? Because ROAS would be key in their own frameworks and their own platforms when you're evaluating your campaigns. And I think that we kind of mentioned them quite enough, starting from the beginning. I'm really wondering, how do you manage working with someone who's as advanced, let's say, as Amazon, as well as, I guess, like independent pharmacies that you might have into your portfolio of online customers? What would be the approach?
So from a media perspective, Amazon obviously offers a very standardized approach. So it's pretty much the same versus Canada, US, or Australia, and Japan, and all the other countries in middle. So when it comes to, as we just mentioned, talking about specific media or specific data and KPIs we look at and track and ways of working. We talked about the campaign for Prime Day or Black Friday. It's very much the same across all different countries. So there is a real synergies in sharing the learnings, in sharing the approach, in the ways of working as well. And I think it's more or less the same from a commercial perspective as well. Obviously, we can also develop more automated tools in the way we approach the media. So there is a greater learnings and a greater scale in how we approach Amazon because, it can be done at global level, so that's much easier. When it comes to more like independent retailers or more like pharmacies or even like smaller supermarket chain or omni-channel chains, I think it's where we need to have a different approach, a bit like one size fits all, but with a local approach. So basically, we will be developing some sort of guidelines or approach that we will discuss with the market and share with them. And obviously, knowing that they have their own expertise and knowledge of the local scene, the local regulation, the local portfolio as well, they will bring a local point of view and layer on top of it. And that's where the global team really needs to partner very closely with the local market. Because obviously we can't scale it up in the same way. But that said, learning that can happen in pharmacy in Italy could be the same in Brazil or in Germany or in Southeast Asia. So it's not saying that we can't learn from one market to another. It's just that scaling up the processes and the tools and the technology, it's a bit more challenging.
I guess it also depends on how the pharmacy channel, for example, is structured. Like in Spain or Italy, a lot of pharmacies are independently owned, whereas in the US or in the UK, you have like these big chains that dominate the market. So I guess that then you have to look at the upper funnel, lower funnel activities in a whole different way depending on the market, no?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Boots, CVS, Superdrug, even like in Asia, A.S. Watson's and so on. They are very much big, like omni-channel retailers. They could be compared to a Walmart or to like a Carrefour. So without any challenge, I'm more thinking about like the real small independent pharmacies, as we may have, for example, in Sweden, where they have their own ways of developing media, their own media offering capabilities, data approach, and things like this, where the challenge is a bit more different when it comes to leveraging the markets one another, I guess. But that's from a media perspective for sure.
Mm-hmm. By the way, who are you guys reporting into from a hierarchy point of view? What department are you part of? Are you marketing? Are you sales? Are you something else?
The age-old question. We're both part of Haleon's global marketing organization, albeit through different, sub-team levels, if you will.
Got it. But obviously, the question, I guess, comes a lot because a lot of times people like you guys are reporting into sales. And I think that's a big thing about e-commerce. And I think that the world, the way that it's evolving, marketing and sales, you can't work in silos anymore, right? Especially in retail media. It's part of the commercial agreement, but obviously the display could be said that it's up to marketing. So how do you guys bring together the interests of these two departments, which in a maybe joking way, we refer to them as rivals sometimes even?
I don't have any magic solutions to this one. I can't tell you how many different share groups I've been part of and how many e-commerce colleagues I've spoken to that all think about this differently and whose organizations answer this differently. Even within our own organization, e-com will often live within a sales structure or a marketing structure or some kind of central commercial excellence or strategy structure, if you will, kind of thing. In some cases, it depends on the nuances of the team, the business itself, or the nature of the leaders themselves, to the extent that the company may allow that variety kind of thing. I think some of the things that I've seen successful is being able to help salespeople think about the marketing dynamics of DCOM and vice versa. Especially from my US experience, when e-com became much more than just Amazon, right? It was somewhat easy to think about Amazon and DCOM as being one and the same because Amazon was e-com. It was one and the same. But when we had to start talking and thinking about omni-channel environments and retailers, and you had to start introducing the DCOM discussions to the Walmart classic meetings or conversations, or Target, again, speaking more so from my US experience, is when you had to introduce different conversations and lingo and acronyms. And so we spent a lot of time just upskilling, introducing the world of e-com to sales teams and introducing the world of e-com sales to marketing teams. And so that capability building and that kind of knowledge sharing, if you will, I think has really helped break down those silos. Ultimately, you still want to encourage teams to behave against their objectives, their OKRs. You want a sales manager to be incented in the right way. And so that may not necessarily require everybody to thinking about e-com all the way, same way, all the time. But having common language has helped, kind of thing, helping a sales manager understand the value that a retail media investment can bring to their trade funding conversations, right? Sometimes, frankly, we're introducing the buyers to that complex issue as much as we are introducing the same issue to our own sales teams. But then to a salesman or to a marketer, for example, recognizing that the higher CPMs that a retail media offering may have, perhaps not justifiable on media metrics alone. And again, Diane would be able to speak to a lot better than I would. Perhaps is justifiable. The fact that paying a premium for some media offerings is valuable because of the retail relationships and value it brings. Sometimes we have JBPs with retail partners that are more dominated and brought to the table because of the media conversations, right? And so there's beauty in that interaction. And we spend a lot of time, Diane and I, just helping our colleagues understand the beauty of those things working together well.
Yeah. Is the fact that a lot of retailers opening their own retail media networks, like kind of spinning them off from the mainstream business, does that make it harder to include retail media in the JBP?
Diane, you want to take that one?
Yeah. Well, basically, I mean, it's very simple yet complicated. Some retailers are including media within their overall retailer and commercial approach, and some others are very much separating commercial and media on different sides. So sometimes you can have a holistic approach and you want to have a global budget and a very much integrated approach into the media and commercial and even shopper as like shopper marketing as in-store activations. And sometimes you can't because of the structure of the retailers and the way they are perceiving revenues from a media perspective being very different from revenues from a retail side of their business. Sometimes they also generate their media revenues through third-party agencies or second-party agency where they have some sort of shares within those media agencies. So it's also bringing another layer of complexity on the way we are approaching this. So as much as we would want to have a very much fully integrated approach, sometimes it's outside of our remit to actually make the final call, and we have to work with it. And it's not. I mean, I think there is pro and cons in both situations. It's not. None of them is perfect. Let's be honest. So we work with what it is.
And for sure, we're on a journey, right? So it is
Obviously.
a big change from also what Steve was mentioning at the beginning, those dynamics of the buyer and the account manager that you would naturally have. And now you see the supplier being on the buying side. And I guess what we're buying is essentially eyeballs, right? And the first party data access that the retailer can give us. And we very briefly touched on GDPR and all the legislation around data. I'm wondering, we do see that a lot of big suppliers are actually trying to create pools of first-party data themselves. What is the approach that you guys are having with regards to data?
So that's a very complex question, as complex as the retailers finding themselves in sharing those data. There is a lot of around privacy. Obviously, they don't want and they can't share like first-party data as such. So obviously, most of the time there's either a clean room or a third party that needs to be like in the middle between the retailer's data and us in the way we're working with those data. But it's also very complex for us in terms of being able to build up reporting, dashboards, integration at market level, regional level, global level, because none of the retailers are sharing the same data. They don't have the same wording. They don't represent the same thing. The attribution period is not the same. So there is a lot of complexity around that for us as well in the way we are using those data and trying to harmonize them, because what obviously we want to do out of it is making sure we are driving actions and insight. We just not build dashboards and look at it and say, oh, okay, there is also always that so what that you want to get out of it, and getting to that final stage and reaching that sort of harmonized view is quite complex. So that's a project that we are leading at a global level, because obviously some markets being very smaller scale and nascent don't have the capabilities, the resources or the budget to develop those tools. So we're looking at this from a global perspective, and that's the benefit of having a global team. And we hope that it will help the market in making sure they understand what is happening with their media, and how they can leverage it and build up insight and data-driven plan in the future. So obviously, the more we have access to to data, the better it will be. And I think you were just mentioning about the strengths and the relationship between the retailers and us as brand suppliers. I think that's also now part of the negotiation, is the access to data. It's a real value and a real money exchange, pretty much. And the approach is very much different where you're talking to a buyer, where you're trying to sell your product, versus when they are trying to sell us media and their access to data. So I think the relationship with those retailers are switching a little bit, and there is a mindset shift that is being a little bit visible within the different retailers we're working with. So it's really interesting to see that evolution in how we navigate. But yeah, as I've always told to my teams, for me, data is at the core of the battle, and that's definitely something that we need to be focusing on, because obviously, whether that's here in Haleon or any other business, more and more like media teams and retail media team, and sometimes like I think Steve could answer that, but even from a content and organic media perspective as well, we are being challenged in justifying our investment and what is actually what are we getting out of it, and without access to those data is getting obviously increasingly difficult to prove it. So yeah, it's really down to having access to the right data and being able to justify what we're doing. And obviously, the more we have access to data, the more efficient and effective our media plan can be, and therefore the more the budget will be growing in the future. So we need to create that sort of virtuous circle on how we are approaching it.
And then there's the whole other discussion that would do for another whole episode of how do you actually use that data and make it actionable in the right way. But I think we would need probably another half hour. So you guys have both been in the industry for quite some time, have worked in e-commerce before many people got in there. Looking back into your career now, and if you were to give advice to your past selves, what type of advice would you give them with the learnings that you've had until now? Maybe Steve, you can start.
My younger self. I guess a couple things. Curiosity is just a massive skill. Be curious, be willing to wander, be willing to go down rabbit holes, but not too far, not too long kind of thing. But curiosity, even if it's in a different direction you might think, is truly valuable. And that whimsy and that kind of journey of discovery, it can be valuable much later, much different conversations. One, I think for me, the second thing that I've benefited from, and it took me a while to realize this, was that career mazes and career chaos can be better than a career ladder. I remember way back when it was all about the promotion, the bigger title, the longer title, the more senior assignment. But frankly, the fact that I worked as a supply chain analyst a gazillion years ago till this day, I think makes me a better e-com practitioner, right? It makes me be able to speak differently about media. So be willing to explore your career path differently than you might otherwise. Get out of your head, get out of your laptop and explore. I remember when I took my assignment in Canada, and you need to know the consumer, you need to know the marketplace. And so in a virtual world, getting out of your head and your laptop for me meant store checking virtual retailers. And I had to try to figure out a way to use a VPN and do FaceTime with the colleague in their cell phone as they browsed a website kind of thing. But I love still to this day going shopping at my local favorite retailer, Wegmans, a very small retailer here in the US. But I just wander the stores. And that joy of discovery and kind of reminding yourself of your love of CPG, for me, by shopping stores, by checking out products, by buying things on Instagram, as hard as it may be, I think also makes me a better practitioner. So just play and learn, be a consumer as best you can and as often as you can.
What about you, Diane?
I think I would say to myself, my younger self, jump into the decom wave much earlier, if that's even possible.
Got in pretty early.
Yeah, I know, but potentially even more. Don't be afraid in jumping into roles that doesn't seem very sexy, because sometimes they are actually the most exciting ones. Don't judge a book by his cover, I would almost say. And it's I think the culture and the managers are also making a lot of the role. So obviously there is the day-to-day stuff you're doing, but yeah, choose a choose a good manager and a good company to work for. It's really important. So that would be my advices.
This was Diane de la Baronniere and Steve Kinsey from the Global Digital Commerce Media team at Haleon. Christina, interesting, no?
It is very interesting. As you see, first of all, we did get that point of view from healthcare that we're looking for, but at the same time, you also see some very commonalities, let's say, that global roles in the digital transformation focus have, right? I really loved how we touched on the evolution of retail media and where it actually came from, and Diane's point of view on how this actually started from the retailers and the need to improve their profitability as e-commerce is becoming more and more prevalent, and how Amazon has actually been leading this trend, let's say, and the new evolution of media overall.
Yes, exactly. I mean, obviously a lot has happened in the last 3 years, and it's very interesting because both Steve and Diane, if you look at their LinkedIn profiles in the show notes, I mean, it's pretty amazing because they started not only in e-commerce, but actually in the media space within e-commerce before it became trendy as it is now. So they bring a lot of knowledge on not only execution, but as you could hear, capability building, evangelization of the organization around that, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And imagine that Diana also said at the end that she would have liked to have started even earlier, right? So it feels like it's never soon and early enough to jump on those trends and being able to foresee what's coming.
Yeah, exactly. We were talking, Christina, before, that it was interesting how as well they talked about, which is a classic that we've seen quite a lot in our last conversations on retail media, that it's like, how do you combine digital and new media with more traditional ones, no?
And one point that both of them mentioned throughout the conversation, and I really like that, had to do with language, actually. And really, how do you translate the language of the retail media to connect it with what traditional media had been doing? But at the same time, how do you translate e-commerce into the language of what commercial departments have been doing for the past years? And then on top of that, there was another point of language, which was we need to be able to harmonize our data, and the way that each retailer speaks is actually different, and you need to make the translation between those. So it feels like a really clear takeaway that we need to find a way to not get lost in translation when trying to move on with our digital transformation.
Yeah, with so much information that they have, it's pretty amazing that they can still find learnings from one country to another, which like, for example, they mentioned Taiwan with a country in Latin America, for example, which you would never say, no? So it's quite interesting that they can still find like a pattern behind that.
It is quite interesting for healthcare specifically, because as they mentioned, there is a lot of differentiation when it comes to regulations and the limitations they might have. So you might find similarities from different parts of the world that you can connect, but also in cases where things are more similar, like with Amazon, where things are way more standardized, and you can really draw some finite conclusions and, let's say, create the playbook or the toolkit that then you can deploy globally. But as it was clear, it's really about sharing the learnings and the experiences, but we shouldn't expect that we'll find something that's one solution, like one size fits all.
One size fits all. Yeah, no, I agree. Well, hope you, as a listener, enjoyed the show again, being quite retail media intensive lately, but we thought it would be interesting to share learnings out of this space because we think it will be instrumental to you being successful in your job as a FMCG executive. Ultimately, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you subscribe, leave us a review as well, follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll see you in the next episode of the show next Wednesday. Have a great day.